Okay, this week in 1530, CIST 1530, Web Graphics 1, we're going to look at basic photo corrections. And you see on the screen, this will be your starting document. This is the image that you will start with. This is what you'll work through the chapter and correct. This should be your final results. So we're going to look at some of the different tools and talk about image retouching. One thing to start off with, be aware that sometimes imaging, the retouching for images can be overdone. So you need to make sure you look at an image, analyze that image, decide what needs to be correcting, and then also make sure once you're finished that the image has been corrected or improved significantly, but not so much that doesn't no longer looks realistic. Now, if you do find in an image that you find that you've maybe overdone something, remember last week we discussed the history panel. Okay, the history panel is a place you can go back in time to undo your retouching, your image enhancements. So a couple things we're going to look at. We're going to look at how to straighten an image. It's been scanned. You know, this one, for example, is at an angle. It needs to be straightened up. How to crop an image. Look at different color casts that maybe happen, how we can correct that due to exposure. We're also going to look at Adobe Bridge. We looked at this briefly a little bit last week. We'll go into this. This is something that you will be using throughout the semester. All right, so this chapter is just going to touch on the surface of imaging corrections. There's going to be a lot more ways and a lot more advanced techniques that you can use to correct an image. And we're going to look at the very basics. And we'll start looking at first, let's look at our layers panel. Okay, we'll see at first we're working on our background. One thing I want to point out is that when you're working with an image, for any image, if you're doing any corrections, I highly recommend the first thing you do is make a copy of the layer. Okay, so when we work on the background, you'll see that we have the lock icon. Okay, this shows that the layer is locked, that we cannot do anything on this. And you'll see you have some different types of locks located here. Where we can lock the transparent pixel so that when we paint over a pixel, nothing happens. I'm going to unlock this layer for a second. To give you an example of the different options here. So I'm going to use my eraser tool. You'll see when I erase part of this, it now becomes transparent. So that's what the transparent pixels will look like. And so if I lock the transparent pixels, when I go in here to use the brush tool to paint these, once again you have different options up here. So I'm changing the size of my brush tool. You see that as I'm painting, nothing happens in the transparent pixel, even though that I am painting on the image, because I do have these locked. Next to this, I do have my lock the image pixels. So now that I've locked those, when I come over here to paint, you'll see that nothing is happening, okay, because that layer is locked. Also have a position lock to where I try to use my move tool. I'm not able to move anything because it is locked. Next to this, you'll see that I have my prevent auto nesting info. So we'll worry about that later. And then also I have lock all. Okay, so now once again, to bring up the point about the history channel or the history panel, I can now go back in time and change things back as they were when they started. All right, so I've got my layer locked. I'm going to right click this and choose layer from background. Okay, so this brings up my new layer dialog box. So I give the layer name. Color helps me give a visual reference for locating that layer. I can change the opacity, how much of it I can see through, and then also the blending mode. Okay, I'm just going to name this new background or new layer, new background layer. Click OK. So I've created a new layer. Okay, you notice my old one is gone. I need to go back once again, going back to history. I can't go back to that point in time. Okay, now to make a duplicate, I'm going to right click and choose to duplicate layer. Once again, it's going to bring up this. So it gives me a new background copy. I'm going to click OK, and now I have my new background. The eyeball icon just turns my visibility on or off. So I'm going to turn off my background, the original. So I'm going to only work on my copy. This also helps me, besides going through the history panel, but if I accidentally mess up somewhere on my corrections and I need to start over, I can quickly go delete this and go back to my original. So once again, I'm going to make a new background copy and I'm going to work from there. Once again, how much retouching I need to do is going to depend on my goals for the image. Okay, so this is my starting document. This is where I want to end up. Okay, so analyzing this, looking at these images, a few things I can tell. First, I can tell the color has been adjusted. Okay, so there has been some color corrections. The image has been rotated so it is no longer crooked. Also, the white border has been removed, so the image has been cropped. As you can see here. Also, this here has been fixed. All right, so I removed this rip, the flaws in it, the image. I've adjusted the overall contrast, or tonal range of the image, adjust the color, sharpened the image. These are just a few of the things that we're going to look at in this chapter. Let's talk a little bit about resolution, image size. Resolution can be a challenging topic. Some of you may want to look at resolution as in different ways. Some of you may want to mean pixel dimensions, which is the width and height of the pixels. Maybe some may mean pixels per inches, the pixel density. Now, if we go up to image and image size, okay, so this is where I'm talking about the pixels here, the resolution, pixels per inch, pixels per centimeter. Okay, also the changes here, as we're now looking at it in inches, but we can also view our image in pixels. So pixel size, pixel resolution can be a tricky subject to work with. I'm going to hit cancel on that. So as we're working this, we'll make sure we have the appropriate number of pixels. as we work through the image. So if we have, to determine how many pixels we have, you multiply the image width by the height in pixels. So there allows you to know how many pixels are in the image. So an example we're given in the textbook is 1,000 by 1,000 pixel image has 1 million pixels. Now these pixel dimensions, they're also going to affect the file size and upload download times for this as well. So we're going to start by looking at Adobe Bridge. So I'm going to click File and Browse in Bridge. Sometimes it does take a little while for this to open up. And so we have our Bridge windows opening. And as it is still loading, okay, now we've loaded. Go ahead and choose File. And we see we got some options here to search in Bridge. You can search Adobe stock photos. It's a place you can import photos from your camera. If you need to return to Photoshop, you can choose this option here. And we can also choose to our navigation. So we navigate to the files. And so we can see the files and a preview of the files and file information will be listed here as well. You can also rate files in Bridge. You give them star ratings. You can set keywords for your file. It allows you to help search for those. Okay, so I've already opened up the files that we're going to use this week. So we'll go ahead and close out the Adobe Bridge file program. All right, so now let's look at straightening and cropping this image. As I said, you can tell that it needs to be straightened and it's going to be cropped. We're going to crop out the white background. So we're going to start with this here. All right, so first off, we'll go over our tools panel and we're going to come to our crop tool. Okay, now you see that you do have some options under this. We will cover some of these later. We're going to choose the crop tool. When you choose the crop tool, you'll see that you have these options come around the corner. Okay, so you've got the borders around that allows you to crop the image. And you simply click and drag those inward until you have the image cropped to your satisfaction. Now, cropping does crop in straight lines. So you make sure that you've cropped enough to where you do not have, for example, the white left there. In the option bar, you do have the commit or do not commit buttons up here. Now, that is one way you can crop. Another way you can crop an image is by using the option bars at the top. So up here I do have some different options I can set. So I'm going to use the width and height and resolution. All right, so I'm going to crop this 7 inches by 7 inches or pixels. Actually, I'm going to change this to type in 7 inches by 7 inches. And I'm going to put the resolution at 200 pixels per inch. I'll click the select button or the commit button, and you'll see that my image is now been cropped down to that size. We also need to straighten the image. So see, we have a straightener here. So I'm going to go back and crop that. So I'm going to choose the straighten. And as I click and drag this, I can drag a straight line. And you'll see that it straightens the image. So in this case, I'm going to click the straighten button, and I'm going to choose where the sky ends. You can see the degrees of my line. So I have a straight line. I release. One time, get this straightened out here. When I release, it will straighten the image out. Now I can crop the image this way as well, if I so choose. I can also use the option up here as well. Another way you can straighten an image is you can go to Edit and then Transform and Rotate. Okay, so this one puts a bounding box around the thing, around your image, and you can straighten an image this way as well. Okay, this gives you a little bit more of a freehand ability to straighten an image. This is my preferred way to straighten images, but you can do this either way. As I've told you, Photoshop gives you multiple ways to accomplish the same task. Okay, so the textbook wants us to straighten the image by using the straighten button. And straighten it as such. All right, so now we've got the image straight. And now we're going to get rid of the white border that's around the image. And we do this, we're going to simply just click these and drag these in to crop those white borders on the outside out. Once we're done, we're going to click the commit button. You'll see that our image has been resized. Notice though that the man is gone here. So we're going to work on that later on. One thing I do want to point out, one little tip, is after you resize the image, after you crop this out, be sure to select another tool. Otherwise, the next time you try something, if you don't select that other tool, it's easy to not go select it and start cropping again. All right, next we're going to look at adjusting the color and the tone. There are a couple different ways you can do this. One way is adding an adjustment layer. So you can come to adjustments and you have different layers here. Now this is not the correct one, but for example, if I wanted to adjust the brightness, I can apply a brightness contrast layer and adjust this. You can see how the adjustments affect the image. Thing is, it's not affecting the image. Okay, adjustment layers are non-destructive ways to adjust an image. Another way we're going to look at it is we're going to look at the curves. Okay, so we're going to click on curves, and this allows us to adjust the tone and color of the image. Don't be intimidated by this. Okay, this does look like it's a really complex. It's not as bad as it looks. All right, so to adjust this curves, using the curves adjustments layer, we are going to select, well, first of all, we're going to look at some of these options. We got the option to click and drag the image to modify the curve. We've got options here to sample the image in gray point, sample the image in white point, which is what we're going to choose. We've got our edit points, modify, draw to modify the curve, smooth the curve values, and then calculate a more accurate histogram. We're going to choose the sample image to set white point. So then we're going to come over here and we're going to choose a color here. Now, one thing though, it's going to be easier if we do zoom in on this. So we're going to choose the white point. You see that we've adjusted the color, and you see the curve has changed. Once again, though, we went from this to the image looking like this. Now, if we want to know the color value of this, of our sample, in here we can go to the window and choose the info. Okay, so this is going to show us the color of what we are sampling in both RGB and CMYK, and we will cover the colors later. This is just a way you can see the color samplings here, the values of the color that's being chosen. All right, so let's click back on the adjustments. And here we're going to use a level adjustment. So we're going to look for the levels. When we click through levels, see it's added to our layer panel. We do have some options in here. Sample the image in a black point. We'll sample in a gray point or a white point. You do have different color channels, so you can isolate. For example, the RGB is the red, green, blue. Those pixels make up the color of an image. So we can isolate those and say if we want just to adjust the reds, we can as well. So, for example, if I wanted to just adjust some of the reds, I can also use the sliders under the image to adjust. Same with the green. Okay, so these give you a lot of power that you can use to adjust the individual channels, but also you can adjust the entire RGB spectrum as well. So I'll pull that down to delete it. We'll start over. So I've got my levels channel added. So we're going to drag the left. This is our black point, this is our gray points, and our white points. So I want to drag this to 15, and you see the number changing underneath it. Okay, so I'm going to change it to 15. You'll see there's some adjustments being made. So now that all tones that are less than 15 have become black. You'll see as I drag this over, okay, the more I drag it, the more darker the image is, the more black the image has become. I can also set that by clicking and typing in the number as well. The middle triangle I'm going to adjust to 0.90. So I can adjust this. Let's see if I drag to the black, the number goes up. And I'm just going to type it in. So I have this now adjusted to 0.90. And now I have adjusted those. Now, one of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to flatten the image. Flatten the image is taking these two adjustment layers and my new background copy, and I'm going to smush them down into one layer. The reason I'm going to do this is because it now makes it easier to work with just that one layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my menu, into layer, and then I'm going to come down to flatten image. Now this is going to get rid of my hidden layer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that at this point, because now I've created a new layer. Okay, so now my new background layer with all my changes has been created. And we'll take a closer look at this and compare it now to our final. It's still not quite there yet. It's getting there. All right, so now we're going to look at the spot healing brush tool. So we're going to start now by we're going to look at removing this crease. So I want to make a layer from this background again. All right, so the spot healing brush tool. Basically, we're going to spot this out. We're going to fix this where it has this image. We'll start. We're going to go ahead and zoom in so we can see this crease. See how bad it looks. We're going to come over to our healing brush. So we use a spot healing brush. Now, once again, we've got the brush size that can be adjusted here. We have our mode. So right now I'm set to normal. We also have the different types, whether it's content aware. Where content aware, what that's going to do is it's going to take into consideration the surrounding pixels and replace what we're working with those surrounding pixels. So in this book, it recommends you use 25 pixels, hardness set at 100, and the content aware. So to remove this, you want to make sure though that you don't cause any other patterns to appear. So you want to make sure that when you use something like the spot healing brush tool, you're only going to use it closely in the areas that need to be repaired. Don't use more than necessary. So you want the brush size only a little bit larger than what you're repairing. All right, so then we're just going to click, and you'll see that we're painting this area. As we're going down. And when I release, you see that that crease has been removed. Now, I didn't do this part down here to give you a demonstration of how it's going to look. Okay, so if you're going to do the entire thing at one time, it would be a good idea to make sure you can see the entire image. So in here, I'm going to go back through and finish this. Working with the sky, it works really well. Sometimes working with the image, you can have some issues where things don't quite match up. In this case, it worked out pretty well. Fixing this image. Okay, also there's a white hair in the upper right area of the image. So we see that when this image was scanned, this was put in. And once again, we can use the spot healing brush tool to remove imperfections, not only in something that's been scanned, but also on our image as well. For example, I wanted to remove this little dot. I can do that as well to clean up the image. So anywhere you see something that needs to be cleaned up, you can use your spot healing brush tool to clean it up. For example, this area here, any of this that needs to be cleaned, the spot healing brush tool is a great tool to use for spot areas to be cleaned up in your images. And there are quite a few of them in this project. One of the big things is to make sure your monitor is clean as well, because some items you will see you may think are part of the image. It's actually just maybe dust on your monitor. So make sure that you wipe your monitor off before you start working on this. Now this is something, even using the spot healing brush tool and the content aware, there are going to be times that you have to manually go in and still use a clone stamp or use some kind of paintbrush, something that you're going to do a manual touch up on. It's not going to fix everything. So you may have to do some touch ups as well. Now speaking of the content aware, we're now going to remove this guy over here to the far right of our image. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to use content aware. So what we're going to do is first we're going to select the patch tool. All right, the patch tool is going to allow me to remove a larger area rather than the spot healing brush tool. So we're going to use patch tool. We've got some options up here. We got our patch. Right now it's on normal. We're going to change that to content aware. We're going to leave the structure at 4. Before we do this, looking at the normal, in here I can choose now the source and destination. So I can choose what I'm selecting. So for example, now I'm going to undo this. I'm going to make a selection here. This is my source. And now I'm moving that to my destination. So this is a way that, an extreme example here of how to use the patch tool. I'm going to undo that, deselect. And same thing, if I know the destination, if I know I'm going to replace this area here, I can use that as the destination. And then move it to my source. So we'll go back to my history. So I'm going to go back to my patch tool. I'm going to choose the content aware. I'm going to leave this structure set at 4. All right, so I am going to drag this patch tool around this boy. And shadow. So I now have that selected. Doesn't have to be right up against him, okay, but you don't want to come out here and start selecting. You want to make sure that you keep it kind of tight to him. So now I have my patch selected where I want it. I can now drag this, and you see that when I move this, the image is going to be replaced by my destination. So we'll release that, go to select, deselect it, and now the person is gone. Notice though that it's not quite right. Okay, I was a little loose on my selections here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and do this again. Actually, let me deselect that. I'll make sure I get his shadow. Now, if you make a selection like I have just left part of his hair, I don't have to necessarily start over because I can come up to here and my options is to add to the selection. So I click this and then I can readjust to add to the selection. Notice though that I do have a section there that has been left unselected. I'm going to deselect. Okay, so now he's been removed. Replaced it with part of the wall and buildings. Not the cleanest cut in the world, but we're going to touch it up later on. All right, so next thing is to look at the clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool, what that does is it lets me sample a part of my image and clone it somewhere else. All right, so we can look at the clone stamp tool. To give you an example of what it's doing, we'll look at the animation of how we sampled an area and then it has been clone stamped somewhere else. So we're going to take the pixels from one area and put them in another. All right, so we're going to select the clone stamp tool. Once again, we have our brush sizes, the hardness area. So we're going to choose 60 pixels for the size, and we're going to choose 30% for the hardness. Got some options here. The opacity, how much can we see through it? The blending mode, the flow, how much is it going to push on when we do this clone stamp. We also have some options here for the angle. We're going to use aligned, and we're going to sample the current layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix this area here. So I'm going to go to an area to where I have smooth area. Now this is something I was trying to make an edit seamless. So when I start, for example, I'm going to define my area that I'm going to use. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key and click. That now becomes my sample area. And you'll see that as I move this, it is now copied. You'll see the little white cross hairs. That is my area that's being copied over. Now, if I get too far, you'll see that it starts cloning this other kid, this other person. And so I can make a clone of the person and move them around in the image this way as well. So we're not going to do that though. We're going to start over on this. We're going to choose a point that we're going to copy. We're going to alt click. That's our source point. What we're going to do is we're going to try to even this out a little bit. So we got our source point. Now when you do use the clone stamp tool, it is very easy to get something like this where it copies over part of the image, or if your source point runs over where you're copying, it still copies from the source point, not the edit. So I'm going to make a new source point and smooth that out. All right, so that's not the greatest in the world. We're going to play with this a little bit and adjust it. This sometimes you have to take multiple samples and keep adjusting to get the image how you would like it. And for instance, I don't like this area here. Now we look on our ending document, it's not there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove those. First, I'm going to zoom in. Using my clone stamp tool. And for something like this, I'd adjust the size. I'm going to define my point. And then simply paint these out. Same with this image here. Okay, so I've got two rocks that look exactly alike. In this case, I'm going to remove this main distinguishing feature. So that it's not quite as noticeable. I still have one on the end here I'm going to remove. Okay, better. So clone stamp, even though you may have settings given to you like the book, you may need to change those settings and adjust. I recommend sampling small sizes. Make small strokes rather than broad strokes. Now, each time you make a sample, it's going to begin with a new source point. So once again, if I'm making a source point here and making an edit over here, my source point, if it goes into any other part of the image, it's going to make a copy of that. Okay, there are a few others in here that needs to be fixed. We see that we have these lines here that need to be fixed. So in this case, I'm going to choose my source point. there. All right, so that didn't quite match up, so we'll undo that. And we're going to leave that alone for now. With the exception of this one here. This is something that's not an exact science. So sometimes you do have to play around with this, test it out, maybe where you don't like the way it looks. And so you can always undo that task. Okay, another part that we need to fix is this building area over here. As we see that this part of the building has been copied over here. So once again, I'm going to zoom in, and I am going to define my source. And we're going to make copy this part of the building. Once again, this is something that you want to make sure that you have small strokes. And if you need to, you can always readjust your source point. As you see here, I've got this hard line. This is where I've got to the edge of the source of the file. So we'll readjust this. And once again, this is not perfect here at all. This is going to be a time-consuming task. In this situation, it's not going to be something that's very noticeable, but you do want to make sure that you have it corrected. And you may need to use a smaller brush, go back in and touch up everything. I'm not going to do this. right now. Okay, so now we're going to look at sharpening the image. All right, so this is going to be where we're giving it a little bit more clarity. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to zoom in about 400%. So right now we're at 200%. So we can see the boy's shirt. All right, so we're going to add a filter, because filters are a great way to add to an image. You get all kinds of different options you can choose for the filters. We're going to choose noise, then the dust and scratches. Leave the radius at 1, and we're just going to click OK. And you'll see, to give you an example of this filter, you'll be able to see how it is adjusted based off the radius. So leave it at 1. You can see how the adjusting the threshold changes the image. Now nothing has taken effect. Nothing takes effect until I click OK. So we're going to leave this as the recommended settings. We also want to sharpen now, so we'll go back to filter and down to sharpen. Then we're going to use the smart sharpen. And then in this dialog box, we're going to have the difference for the amount, the radius, how much noise to reduce. Also, what are we going to move? We're going to remove a Gaussian blur, lens blur, motion. If you catch an image where motion is, you can remove some of that. So we're going to leave this on lens blur. And we'll see how we change these settings, how it affects it. So we're going to change the amount to 60%. We'll change the radius to 1.5, but we can see how the radius has changed. We can see how the image has changed as well. So we'll put like 1.5. And if you're happy with the results, you go ahead and click OK to apply. Let's zoom out. And we're going to compare it to our final. It's not going to be the same. So we'll zoom out again. So we're both at 66.7. Not quite exactly the same. It's pretty close to our final results. Achieving the exact same results is very difficult, even if you're given the exact same settings. You know, for example, in this one, the removing the boy with the content aware, that was located over here, and using the tool to paint this in. You can see mine looks different. It's really going to be dependent on the amount of time that you spend. Settings could be changed with the different modes, the adjustments that we added. So this week, what we did look at is we looked at straightening an image, cropping an image, a couple different ways to do those, removing unwanted parts of an image. We looked at using the spot healing brush tool, the patch tool. One thing, and I'm going to go back to my starting document here. There is another way to remove something from an image other than using the patch tool. that we will look at very briefly. I'm going to use a different selection tool. I'm going to use my magnetic lasso tool. Okay, this allows me to grab to the edge of an image and allow me to click and add anchor points. So it allows me to get a closer selection of what I'm going to be removing. Every time I click, I'm adding an anchor point, or it will add them for me as it grabs to the edge of the pixels. This is a tool that is very, very powerful. It's also one that is easily, could be one of the most frustrating tools in Photoshop, as sometimes it will not close its loop. You have to be careful when you're using this. If you don't close the loop with the magnetic lasso tool, it will keep adding these anchor points. And you'll see when I get to the closing, you'll see that little circle that's appeared by my icon. That lets me know if that has been closed. All right, now with this selection, I can come in here to edit and go to content aware fill. Okay, so it does allow me to remove him here as well. I can do some options here as well for these. I'm just going to click OK. And so now I've removed him, and this is the magnetic tool that can get frustrating. So I have removed him. Now you notice there is still an outline of him, so it would require me to still do some cleanup on the image. I would still need to use my clone stamp tool, but you notice my building is not quite as bad as it was using the patch tool. I do have like a ghost outline of the boy here as well. The reason I'm showing you this now is because there are more than one way to accomplish different tasks in Photoshop. And I'm going to stress this throughout the semester. You're going to need to find your own way that you like to accomplish tasks. Okay, I want you to understand all the ways, but you'll find your way that you feel more comfortable with. Personally, I prefer using the magnetic lasso tool versus the patch tool, and then using the content aware fill. All right, so this week, your assignments. We work through the chapter. You'll be working on this file. This is the file that you will submit. Be sure to complete your discussion board. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email.